I'm Sophia, the founder of Healing Hearts, and I'm excited to announce we'll be having our first interview with Chinmayi Balusu, who is an undergrad at Columbia University in the city of New York. She's also the founder of Simply Neuroscience, which is a nonprofit organization. Welcome, Chinmayi. Thank you for being here and taking the time to hop on. I also really quickly want to introduce Healing Hearts. So Healing Hearts is a nonprofit organization which aims to spread awareness about mental health. We provide tips, posts, information all about mental health, as well as our other media content, including our YouTube interviews, sharing expertise from others in the medical field. I was also inspired to create this organization because I love technology and AI plus healthcare. I noticed that healthcare and mental health was not spread around enough and needed to be focused more. So I decided to start Healing Hearts. With that being said, we can start the interview. So in the beginning, I would like for you to introduce yourself.
Sure. Hi, everyone. My name is Chinmayi Balusu. I'm originally from Northern California, which is where I was born and raised and currently live. And I'm entering my third year of undergrad at Columbia, where I'm studying a mix of neuroscience and medical humanities. My research background is primarily in cognitive neuroscience and traumatic brain injury, with a past history in neurodegeneration a bit and age-related diseases. And I'm the founder and chief executive officer of Simply Neuroscience, which is a nonprofit organization dedicated to getting students empowered and involved in pursuing neuroscience and psychology from the lens of education, outreach, and awareness means. And so our primary goal is making the field a lot more accessible at an earlier age for students through connecting them with free resources, opportunities, events, mentorship, and more. And outside of that, I'm absolutely still a science enthusiast day and night, and I'm passionate about getting fellow youth involved in science communication to the general public, advocating for more inclusive spaces for women in the sciences. And in my free time, I enjoy playing soccer. I'm a Taekwondo student. And my family's really big on gardening, so usually spend a lot of time gardening and succulents as well, taking care of the succulents.
Yeah, it's great to know how you have like hobbies and lots of things. And I also love how you're really passionate about neuroscience. So it's great to know. So moving on to the next question. What experience do you have in the field of mental health?
So I would say my experience is more coming from the educational avenue. I think being a neuroscience student over the past few years, definitely understanding tackling stigma from the sort of biological, anatomical, clinical perspective. And, not just saying in certain cultures, let's say, like depression is something that they don't realize is rooted back to the biology or the biochemical aspects of the brain. So my kind of perspective is of that scientific lens of saying, there are certain things that go awry with our brains sometimes. And that's when we can kind of see these manifestations of different mental illnesses, neurological conditions. And so I think I started to bring that perspective in. And obviously my work with neuroscience education is on getting students that kind of firsthand knowledge in the science avenue so that they can make empowered decisions. They can have the opportunity to spread information to their communities, to their families, to their friends. That's rooted in science, that's rooted in this kind of understanding of the brain, and not just something that, as kind of pop culture makes it like, oh, I'm depressed. And no, that's not all the case, but like, here's actually what's going on in your brain behind that. So that's kind of the lens I carry. And there's quite a few folks out there who are more on the advocacy end of like directly connecting with, let's say, legislators, for instance. I think as of right now, within the scope of Simply Neuroscience too, I'm currently more on the education side though. There's quite a wide range, right? In the ways that you can be involved in raising awareness for mental health.
Yeah, that's great to know. Okay, so for the next question, what is a typical day in your life?
Yeah, so it definitely is dominated by the fact that I'm a student at the moment, a full-time student. So it is a mix of classes, and hopefully starting this fall, those classes will be in person. It's a mix of research commitments, working on Simply Neuroscience, working on sort of hosting introductory workshops for students just digitally around the world. And it's a mix of being engaged with clubs and student organizations on campus, So overall, I think what the really neat part is that being in college, you get to kind of set your own pace and your own schedule for how you want things to look like. So the neat thing about Columbia is that we don't typically have classes on Fridays. So Fridays are usually heavy kind of research involvement days or catching up on Simply Neuroscience activities days for me personally. So that's kind of a neat sort of a 4-day work week to have. But as we know, the student life is not just 4 days, it's 7 days, 24 hours a week. So it is really a balance of just if I have class in the morning, which I usually prefer to have, just get everything over with in the morning and then have the afternoon and evening to work. I find that ideal. Usually like Simply Neuroscience falls within those small little gaps in the schedule oftentimes, like when you get to class early and there's 10 minutes before a lecture starts and you just want to start catching up on emails or Slack messages and scheduling calls while there's like a lunch period of an hour. So it is really a mix and match. There's no real way, I would say, sort of sit down for 4 solid hours and get everything done. It's sort of, you just got to find time in your schedule wherever you are.
Yeah, it's kind of great how you're managing taking care of like Simply Neuroscience as well as being a college student. So that's great to know. Um, for the next question, what inspired you to create Simply Neuroscience as well as Synaptic Hacks?
Yeah, so just for context for listeners out there, Synaptic Hacks was our recent hackathon, 3-day online hackathon, where students got to ideate and build projects, including one of the tracks was mental health and wellness, and sort of build project proposals that they think they could implement in their community and make real world applications of what they're learning about. So with that in mind, I would say when I was starting out Simply Neuroscience, full disclosure, I did not intend for it to be a nonprofit organization in any means. It was actually the name of my blog. So I was just out of high school. I was matriculating into college. And I thought, well, this sort of neuroscience journey of mine was relatively pretty solitary. I didn't really have many peers in my close vicinity that share the same sort of desire to major in neuroscience in college, let's say. So it was definitely a way for me to reflect on experiences and say, share with other students in the following years to come that, hey, these are these resources that I found really useful. You should look into them. And then, of course, you know how social media is, and then people start spotting it and they're like, this is so cool. And I sort of had the same kind of experiences and I'd like to join in and just kind of add my own 2 cents. So I just started expanding from there. And as people come onto the team, they bring their ideas. Like I always think about the podcast as one of those ideas that was really spontaneous, but has ended up building into something really cool. I think we're about close to 50 episodes now, which is really remarkable for just about a year or so. And so everything along the way has just kind of been extensions of those 3 same core values, though. Since the start, it's just always been on how do you educate people? How do you get them to take that out in their community in a meaningful way and combat certain stigmas about neuroscience or misconceptions, stereotypes, myths, etc., for a more engaged community. Because neuroscience is obviously one of those fields that impacts you from the time that you wake up to the time that you go to sleep, honestly. So in that way, I would say the whole aspect of we're not just, going to college, getting a degree in neuroscience, learning from textbooks, but wanting to see real world change is kind of what trickled into all the different initiatives that we host at the moment, as well as synaptic hacks, I would say.
Yeah, that's a great way to, first start off and loved how you were in the path of like wanted to persevere to go through to be where you are today. So for the next question, what were some challenges you faced when you started Simply Neuroscience?
I certainly did not have too much or extensive nonprofit leadership experience. I've worked with similar nonprofits before, not on the sort of executive level where we were building from the ground up. So that was a very different experience because it's always one thing to kind of set off on your journey as the train is starting versus like hopping onto the train midway through the journey, right? It's like you got to make sure all the logistics are together. So that was definitely a wild experience. I think I was 16 at the time. I was just going into college. So it was like on one hand, learning about college, and then one hand, trying to kind of set this in motion. And I believe I was also on a family vacation during that summer. So it was definitely like working on vacation and time zones. It was a very, very wild time, but very fun. I'm glad. I'm glad that we put that effort in that summer. So definitely a learning journey along the way. I mean, you take 3 steps back, sometimes it takes 2 steps back. It's just always learning from things that could be done better, always reflecting, right? Like synaptic hacks racked up recently. And there's always really ways to improve and expand for next year and beyond. So those kind of things I'm still learning on a daily basis. I learned from my teammates. I think I've definitely learned how to grow into a more effective individual and a group leader, and really encouraging my teammates to take initiative. Um, and kind of having that perspective of growth while still trying to stick true to the daily reality of we can only do so much because we're all students and we're all volunteers and we only have XYZ number of hours in a week, to make sure we're not getting burned out. So that kind of a balance has also been really valuable, and just learning that along the way of like making sure you're realistic, making sure you're connecting with the right people, and making sure that your team has really opportunities to grow. I think that's something that is always in the back of my head. Like if I saw an opportunity on LinkedIn, let's say, and I'm like, this could be perfect for my teammates. We have a specific channel for that. We just like to share non-SN related opportunities as well, because professional development is super important as well. So maybe that's the last part I would share, that community aspect too. It is kind of weird to be in this kind of digital landscape. Simply Neuroscience is mostly virtual platform since everyone is from all around the world. So trying to build that sort of digital community and finding ways to stay bonded and engage with one another is really intricate, but trying to get a feel for that has been a wild ride, but a very essential one.
Yeah, it's great to know, how like despite many things were going on, like while you started it, you were able to overcome those challenges. So that's a really great accomplishment. So for the next question, what was your experience creating your Synaptic Hackathon?
Yeah. um, it was quite intense, and I think it came together okay. It was just a very intense weekend. And I think we're still on the sort of processing, oh my gosh, this is done phase. But I would say the most fun parts were, one, the variety of speakers that came in. Some of them were coming in at very early times in Eastern time because they were also coming from all around the world. So they were in Australia, they were in India, they were in the UK with different time zones. So being able to accommodate for such a variety of time zones, honestly, was kind of I felt proud in a way, because instead of just expecting everyone to adhere to, okay, we're sticking with Eastern time, like we kicked off our opening ceremony at midnight Eastern, which was 9 p.m. for me. And it's like the morning time for most folks in Asia, let's say. So kind of trying to be accommodating for the time zones instead of having that kind of Western Europeanized, everyone needs to fit to the North America time zones, was one logistic that we tried to overcome as just a barrier for learning, right? You don't want to be up at 4 a.m. learning about things. You want to be able to learn on your own time. So that was one thing. The other thing I was really proud about was the prize tracks, because those were something that our team brainstormed. And for context, the prize tracks are basically themes that competitors submit projects around. So I alluded to mental health and wellness before. So you might answer questions like, where do you see the gap in accessibility for mental health services going in a post-pandemic world? How can we bridge the divide, the digital divide, in accessing those currently? And other categories, even like education and outreach and neurotechnology and medicine, public health and research. So kind of seeing that wide realm in brainstorming was really neat. But the best part was in seeing how the submitted projects brought that to life. So there were some really interesting ones, and the winners will be announced soon. So I feel like by the time this episode's out, it'll be out. But there's some really interesting ones that take into account, for instance, like how does the urban environment contribute to our brain health in positive or in detrimental ways, or impact your risk of developing certain conditions? So, environmental science, urban structures, and you've got neuroscience in one hand. So I think it's one thing to brainstorm and ideate about what interdisciplinary neuroscience looks like. And it's the best feeling in the world to actually see that come to life by fellow students. So I think that was the best part in planning the hackathon. Definitely a lot of logistics in terms of ironing out with, I think, over 1,100 people signed up. It was like, how do we iron out the participant guide and make sure everything is in one place for everyone? ironing out Zoom logistics was Zoom is always a nightmare, right? It gives you technical difficulties at the worst times. So things like that, making sure our judges are involved, making sure our students can access mentorship and access help during the hackathon. So quite a lot of moving parts, but at the end of the day, it was really neat to just have, a solid 3-day weekend where people could kind of come together and meet new folks and, kick off hopefully the school year with some neat ideas up their sleeve.
Yeah, it's great to know that you were handling like a lot of things, especially like I believe you did say this as well as I saw you had like more than almost 1,000 people coming, and so it was like great to handle all of that. So for the next question, what were some of the mental health related issues you see in today's society?
I would say, actually, this is something that I believe, I don't remember exactly who it was. It might have been hmm, the Surgeon General, actually, Dr. Morthy, or someone, one of the higher ranking public health officials, was talking about how loneliness and social isolation has become like a public health issue, but it's also obviously a mental health crisis. I think that obviously the pandemic is a big cause, right? But I think something among just our generation, Gen Z, millennials, I think especially, we're definitely seeing like people are more focused on, they live alone, let's say, while pursuing their career, while pursuing school. And so their sort of social connections are not the same for our age as they were for, let's say, folks in their 50s and 60s, like our parents' generation or grandparents' generation, where you grew up with people around you and you kind of lived in the same town, let's say, or you had that sort of in-person connection. But now a lot of us are going more the digital route. We have friends who we, chat with, FaceTime with, Skype with. We only meet them once or twice a year, let's say. So those sorts of relationships are really difficult to navigate, especially with COVID coming into the mix. So I think that issue of just isolation being kind of not something that's considered a potential issue or a potential red flag, but just kind of being taken as a norm has been pretty harmful for folks. Being alone by yourself is not a problem. It can be a problem. It's kind of there's that gray area in between where some people need help but don't realize that they would actually need help or support or finding those connections because it's not something that is addressed as often. Which again, it comes back to the point that we really need to think about, mental health needs for each generation and how they've shifted over time. For instance, the mental health needs of our grandparents as they're aging is definitely different from what our generation needs. So I think that sort of flexibility and understanding how are needs evolving, how is COVID shifting the tide, definitely needs to be understood and investigated a lot further.
Yeah, that's definitely true, especially how like COVID hit us hugely. Definitely. So for the next question, what would be some advice you would give to newcomers who are just starting organizations or hackathons?
Yeah, I would say definitely make sure that you have the time and bandwidth because it is something that will drain your energy and leave you burned out if you are not really taking care of yourself along the way or being realistic with your goals, I would say. I think having a really strong team is important. I mean, Simply Neuroscience is 25 different initiatives today, which I is beyond my wildest dreams when I was starting out. And it wouldn't be possible without, a really great team, a leadership team. And, leadership teams don't just get built in one day. It's an evolving process. Um, and when you set out saying, I'm the founder, it doesn't mean that you're just the founder. There, you have to step up into a lot of roles along the way, support your team. You're not just kind of focusing on your own things, but you're also trying to meld the team together, create that nature. So it definitely does take a lot of energy investment. Some people I see starting out organizations when they're also going through a really difficult time in their life in terms of a lot of responsibilities or work. And so sometimes it feels like they can fizzle out. And honestly, there really is no great or bad time to work on a passion project and get it started, but it's just about making sure that you're in the right headspace, I would say. Because otherwise, if you're frustrated by everything going on with the responsibilities and what's on your plate, you may start getting frustrated with your idea itself rather than just the circumstances, which I think is actually really disappointing when you start to lose hope in your idea for causes that are beyond your control, right? So I think just being realistic about how much you have on your plate, how much you have to take things on. Even if you don't start working on, a project right now, if you don't found a project right now, there's always ways to go about doing so for the rest of your lifetime. It's never too early or never too late. I think Simply Neuroscience, that perfect time was just a stroke of luck. But even if I had not gone about setting that blog up in the first place, I don't think I would have minimized kind of the drive I had for going and getting involved in outreach efforts and whatnot in my college community or beyond. So I would say it's just a matter of finding that really nice sweet spot in terms of how much you can achieve and how much time you have to invest.
Yeah, that's definitely true. For the next question, what do you feel most proud about while creating your hackathon or organization?
Ooh, I would say the people. I think I've definitely seen and heard a lot of stories from folks who met like good friends, good brain buddies from hackathons or events. That makes me really happy, like these people may have never been able to meet in person, but they were able to get connected in the digital landscapes. That's always a win. That makes me very happy. I think the other thing that's really neat to see is just people of all ages coming together to support young folks because I think the scientific field, the way that it's been set up for the past few decades, has been like you start your scientific journey. Officially, you're a scientist when you're in grad school or beyond. But now that kind of an attitude is diminishing a lot more and being focused on if you're practicing science and you're contributing back to academia and the community, then you are a scientist in whatever shape or form that takes. Excuse me. So that means that, youth are becoming increasingly more on the forefront to being scientists and driving that sort of cutting edge innovation, thoughts, research. Even if it's not the kind that's funded, like $5 million, there's a lot of great ideas among folks our age. So I think just seeing the support of older folks, graduate students, who aren't, I guess, too much older than undergrads, but I think like just even beyond, 13 to 18-year-olds, but like we've got 25-year-olds, we got, 47-year-olds, everyone who just volunteers their time to help make things come together. Like the judges are all volunteers, many of whom just signed up, who we've never heard from, but they just found us on LinkedIn and we're like, I'm going to help out at this hackathon over the weekend. I'm going to give my time towards this cause. And that's the best thing possible. To just have people believe in your cause and not just like your friends believing in you, but just random people on the internet who see you and then say, I'm in, let's do this together. I think that's the most heartwarming part. It's been really awesome.
Yeah, that's awesome to hear how you can still like overcome and have lots of people learn and still grow a lot like during COVID. So that's definitely a huge accomplishment. For the next, a little bit more detailed question. In today's world with busy lives, everyone is stressed out. Do you have any suggestions on what they can do to overcome this?
Yeah, I'm just going to preface this by saying this is something that I found useful. I'm not a mental health professional who's licensed, but a student to student, I would say. I think it's really easy to take on a lot of things and not realize how much time you actually have. I think especially staying at home during the lockdown and quarantines, like we definitely sense that time is passing in very different ways. It's very odd, right? You wake up and all of a sudden it's August somehow. So I would just say, I think being very realistic and setting that time apart to actually relax. I'm definitely kind of someone who's always like, okay, what's next? What's next? I've checked off this to-do list. What's next? So I think for me, like taking weekends to just go out for walks and go see what the friendly neighborhood dogs are up to. These kind of really spontaneous moments in life are really worth it. And it could be, you spontaneously just take a lunch break and then you're like, oh, there's this really interesting movie that I just came across on YouTube suggestions. So maybe I can carve out some time in my evening to make dinner and watch this really nice movie. Maybe, Netflix party with a friend or something. So I think it's really easy to just get caught up in like, I've completed my Google Calendar tasks for the day. What's next? But trying to break outside that cycle of spontaneity, go for a walk, see what's outside your window, kind of and a mindset. It's just really useful to break outside that cycle of like, when are we getting out of this pandemic?
Yeah, those are really great suggestions. For time for another similar question here, people often refuse to seek help, especially when it is mental health related. So do you have any tips or suggestions for them?
I think there's definitely still that kind of an attitude of saying, oh, you see a therapist. But I think increasingly a lot of companies, I know universities often have therapy services available for students. So I think taking those baby steps, maybe you don't have to go and hunt, the internet for a really, really niche therapist that could help you out, but like see what's offered to you in your nearby circles on your daily life, like employers, where you're working, where you're studying, in your community, things like that. And just start really small. Maybe ask around in your friends and family if you know anyone who has recommendations. There's also a lot of really solid online services that are not necessarily, like you have a recurring person to talk with, but like text lines, for instance, that are really nice to just connect in with and say, hey, like I'm feeling a little bit odd. Like I would just want to get it off my shoulders, something like a heavy on your heart. And there's always people that are available to talk. I would say like the most baby steps are just asking your friends if they're happy to lend a shoulder for you to just chat with and just open up a little bit. Of course, it is certainly a different level to chat with a friend versus chat with someone who is trained in a way that can help you sort of express your feelings and thoughts and in a meaningful, healthy manner. But I think, friends and family are still a wonderful resource, and finding those kinds of people who are just willing to give you a minute of their time to vent, especially I think for students, there's sometimes a lot of frustration from studies. So mutual venting, sometimes people recommend. It's really such a flexible spectrum, right? So sometimes it just may be looking up on Google, like what are some different ways to coping mechanisms for, say, strategies for turning your thoughts into healthy directions, and seeing what recommendations it gives you there. Google's a great friend.
Yes. Google is our number one bestie, as well as, communication can definitely help. So love those tips. Um, for the last question, any tips for a person who would like to pursue a career in medicine or science?
I would say there's a million routes to go about doing so. And I think that I know we're a few years apart, but I think just like one thing that I see as a shift in just the past few years that since I started college, it's not even a lot, right? But just the attitude of like to go into medicine, you have to be a biology student, you have to do X, Y, Z, and like check the boxes, right? I don't think it's like that anymore as much. I can say I'm definitely the kind of student who's situated myself at this intersection of the sciences and humanities and going beyond just like, okay, what is the neurobiological basis of all these XYZ conditions, but like more so on what are the lived experiences of these conditions. So kind of different perspectives are becoming a lot more welcomed, I would say, in these fields. So I think we're seeing increasing numbers of students being really open and happy about tying their really diverse interests together. Like one of my friends is interested in like space medicine, which is super neat. I was not aware of that until a few weeks back, too much. So there's really a lot of different ways to kind of combine those interests, right? Like maybe you're really into like Formula One car racing and you want to tie that into your interests, go for it. There's no wrong thing to be involved in the academic world, right? As long as it's giving you the skills to prepare for your certain XYZ, grad school, med school kind of career route. So I just say be open. You never know. College, I would say, is like if you walk in and walk out with the same exact interests and perspectives, then something wrong happened along the way. You're going to change in some way, shape, or form in a good way. For me, that was realizing that I just love the humanities as well. I found my interest in brain injury and advocacy in that realm in college, and I had never thought about it much before. All I really know about brain injury was about concussions, which is nothing compared to how much is out there, right? So that was like just small examples. The classes you take, the people you talk to, the kind of student organizations you get involved in, the spontaneous things you see happening on campus and the lawns and the sidewalks. There's a lot of different ways to go. And I would say college is a really great way to kind of see what's out there and find your niche. But there's a lot of exploration that continues throughout the rest of your medical career and the scientific career in the decades to come. So it's not like we also have to be experts in what we want to do at the end of the day.
Yeah, that's definitely true. I loved everything you said. It's can definitely help our viewers as well as me and everyone. So that is the end of the interview. Thank you so much for being here. Is there anything you want to add?
No, thanks so much for having me, Sophia. I would just say to the listeners out there, never lose sight of your ambition. I think one of the cool things about being a student is you're always optimistic. You're always looking forward to what tomorrow brings. And I would just say never lose sight of that, even when we're graduated and beyond being students. That's the best part.
Thank you. It was great talking to you. Thank you for all the tips and suggestions and information you've given us. I love your passion towards the community, and I hope you have luck on future plans. And it was great talking to you once again. So
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
thanks for watching our first interview with Chinmayi Balusu. Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, and share for more.